Today, it is my privilege to introduce Dr. Leroy Littlebear. While Dr. Leroy Littlebear is regrettably unavailable to join us here in person, we are honored that he will address us virtually on this important topic. Dr. Littlebear stands as one of Canada's foremost Indigenous academic voices. His remarkable career has been marked by numerous accolades, including being named as an Officer of the Order of Canada in 2019, receiving the University of Lethbridge Ingrid Speaker Research Medal in 2017, and being honored with the Alberta Order of Excellence in 2016. He holds honorary doctorates from the University of Lethbridge and the University of Northern British Columbia, reflecting his profound impact on academia and Indigenous scholarship. Dr. Littlebear also serves as an honorary eminent scholar at Red Crow Community College. Throughout his career, Dr. Littlebear has been a pivotal figure in addressing Indigenous knowledge systems and perspectives, particularly in legal and policy realms. His role in establishing the Native American Studies program at the University of Lethbridge and his contributions to initiatives such as the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples underscores his dedication to promoting Indigenous rights and sovereignty. Born and raised on the Blood Reserve, west of Lethbridge, Dr. Littlebear's deep connection to his roots informs his scholarly endeavors and advocacy. His writings have resonated across disciplines, and his influence extends globally, including being the first Indigenous person quoted by the Supreme Court of Canada. Today, as Dr. Littlebear addresses us virtually on Indigenous ways of knowing, mental health, wellness, and healing, we are privileged to draw from his wealth of knowledge and experience. Please join me in extending our heartfelt wishes for his health and well-being, and in welcoming Dr. Leroy Littlebear to enlighten us with his profound insights.
Thank you very much for that introduction. I am very honored to be before you and to have been invited to come and share thoughts with you. So I'd like to introduce myself in a traditional way. Nistuan nakok. Ikas kiniwa, I naksiks, kenau, so kitapiwa, tinenuktu tsitapi. If we wanted to translate that introduction, my Blackfoot name is Ikaskini Lowhorn, and I'm of the Small Robes clan. I'm of Kaina, or sometimes known as the Blood Tribe, and we are of the Blackfoot Confederacy. It was a little bit more than a month ago that we had a Blackfoot archaeology conference at the University of Lethbridge. And it was very interesting that one of our elders ended up telling the archaeologists that were present, "We really dig you. You had to be there." Yeah. Anyways, let's get into some good and deep thinking. Okay. If our text can go to our first slide. Okay. Next. You see, As the abstract says, psychology as an academic discipline is about 150 or so years old. The recognition as a science came about when the Enlightenment era was in full bloom. The Enlightenment era can be interpreted as a rebellion by the commoners against the church and the divine rule of kings. Those two institutions were the educated. They knew how to read and write. They had the libraries. But the rebellion was sometimes referred to as the age of reason. So we can, in other words, we can come to know everything just through pure reason. Think about that. So the notion of pure reason as a source of knowledge, of course, is based on the interpretive template. And I'll explain what the interpretive template is all about. The interpretive template really is our way of trying to structure reality. And so the psychology interpretive template is, of course, based in Western thought, not in Blackfoot thought, not in Anishinaabe or Mi'kmaq. It's based on on Western thought, on Western metaphysics, Western paradigm. Next. See, a different culture like Blackfoot has a different interpretive template and a different reality structuring process. And because of this different interpretive template, Western psychological practitioners cannot just come from the notion of a human is a human is a human, that we're all the same, that we all think the same way, and so on. So to be effective as a, as a scientist, in this case, psychological scientist, we must be aware of the different interpretive templates of different cultures. It's like being a teacher. We turn out teachers as though they're going to be in a unicultural classroom, and mainly Western. And so when there's Indigenous children in the classroom or other cultural groups, the teacher really doesn't connect very well with them because that teacher doesn't really have a cultural background of their student. Next. See, I understand, and this is the way I look at psychology. It is the study of brain functions and the resulting behavior arising therefrom. But where does the interpretive template itself that I've mentioned, where does it come from? Well, the interpretive template is a product of a society's long experience with its environment, including the land, plants, other beings, the cosmos, what's up and below the ground, and so on. That's where a culture comes from. See? So every society, however that society comes into existence, we might want to ask uh, Rousseau about that, because there's lots of theories about how a society comes together. But however they come together, sooner or later, that society claims a territory. And it is in this claimed territory where a culture arises and where the interpretive template comes from. You see, we walk around with this interpretive template based on our cultures, and that's how the data we take in, we use the interpretive template to structure reality. Next. So if we're talking about a culture, customs are those parts of a culture that speak to accepted ways of doing things or accepted social practices. Now, these social practices, for instance, may revolve around organization, governance, marriage, upbringing of children, how we source food, and so on. Those are what we would refer to as customs. But there's also social values. And those are the aspects built into the culture that serve as, if you want to call them as incentives for the members of the society for reward and recognition, so that they would adhere to the culture. Now, values also serve as standards and goals to aspire to. So that's what, part of that interpretive template is made up of. Next. Now, a society culture also is made up of paradigms and metaphysics, if you want to refer to it as the philosophy of the society. So the philosophical aspects of a society's culture is its belief system, ways of explaining the unknown, and all the stories and so on that arise therefrom. So metaphysics and paradigms are the collective agreements on how to interpret data being taken in by our senses. This is where the interpretive template arises from. Okay. Every morning, you wake up, just like this morning, and you think you're dealing with the objective reality. But as Steven Weinberg, a quantum physicist, says, yes, there is an objective reality out there. But as soon as we put a human being in the picture, it becomes an interpretation of that objective reality. And see, the interpretive template is what brings about that human interpretation of the objective reality. So what you're waking up to is not the reality, it is your human cultural interpretation of it. You begin to see the picture? Next. So, Blackfoot, for instance, let me use Blackfoot, and from a Blackfoot perspective, the whole notion of mental wellness. The need for an interpretive tool is what is meant by paradigms of a culture, and the members of that culture use on an everyday basis. Paradigms are embodied largely, and they are largely unspoken aspects of the culture. And usually people, when they're challenged and so on, and say, how do you know that? Why is it like that? You know, easy ways of that, out of those questions says, oh, that's natural law. This is the way it is, say. And those are quick general explanations of this need for an interpretive tool, for what a society calls reality. In other words, all humans have a need to search for the meaning and of life and existence. Sooner or later, we all reach that time. Maybe when we're young, maybe when we're older. Next. See, now, to better understand, and I know these are similar to Anishinaabe, they're similar in Cree, similar in, to Mi'kmaq and so on. But because I'm Blackfoot, that's where I'm coming from. But here is a quick overview of the Blackfoot paradigms, the Blackfoot metaphysics. Blackfoot metaphysics consists of what we refer to as constant flux. In quantum physics, they just refer to it as constant motion. In other words, everything is always in a state of motion. Forms, reforms, deforms, and so on. Existence consists of energy wave. And in fact, those energy waves are the spirit that our elders speak about. Everything is interrelated. That's why our elders and our people refer to all my relations. When they're talking about all my relations, they're not talking about biological relations. We're talking about those trees out there. We're talking about those rocks, the river, the sky, and so on. All those are my relations. And because they all have spirit, they're all animate, like me. See. Next. Renewal of creation is a very important part of, those paradigms. We, in that flux, in that constant motion and so on, hey, we're looking for regular patterns that make for continuing existence. See, in other words, what makes for human existence? In Western thought, we don't think about that. We just think we don't do much renewal. The best way to explain the thinking process in Western thought is been there, done, did it. Let's move on. See. A large part of those Blackfoot paradigms are about land. Why? Well, even in spite of the flux, we know that the land will change. But land does not change as fast as other things. So at least for the time being in that flux, we can refer to the land as a reference. That's why land is a very important part of these metaphysics. And of course, language comes along with that, and it complements those other parts of the metaphysics so that Blackfoot, like Cree and Mi'kmaq, our languages are not about nouns. They're not about, classifications, categories, and so on. They are about motion. They are about processes. See, that's why, for instance, coming into a ceremony, our elders and our ceremonialists are always talking about protocol. In other words, the actions and motions that go with that ceremony. See. Next. So, if we were to take those into a practical setting, we come across the whole notion of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Now, let me make a comment here. I don't mind talking about Maslow. Why? Because Maslow got those teachings from my people. It was from the Blackfoot that he got those teachings that he refers to as the hierarchy of needs. Now, the other comment is those needs are correct, but we would not have taught Maslow that they were in a hierarchy. We would have taught it to him in a holistic way. See? And the thing is, Maslow did not include spirituality in that. So spirituality is a very important part of our metaphysics, but it was left out of those. So with those caveats, let me quickly go through what Maslow refers to as hierarchy of needs. Physical needs, so everything required for physical existence, including food, shelter, clothing. This would include customs that revolve around food sourcing, harvesting, and so on. Medicinal plants, even our architectures, and so on. Those are all part of physical needs. Next. Other needs are security needs, and these would include customs on how we protect ourselves from enemies or animals, natural disasters, and so on, even spirits and so on. Whether, included, etc. So those are, to protect ourselves and so on. And that spiritual aspect is a big part of that, protecting ourselves from other spirits out there. There's the need to belong so that, hey, I'm part of this group, I'm part of this team, and so on. And those customs revolve around biological and social organization, relatives, friends, even gender roles, clans, societies, tribes, and as I had mentioned, confederacy. These are the bases that we use for belonging. See, and then when you don't belong, you seem to be lost. See. Next. There's personal needs. And these personal needs are not just physical and so on, but there's the need for that comes with us as humans. It's human nature that we want recognition, we want self-worth, and so on, contributions of individuals, and so on, recognition of skills and knowledge of, and so on. These are practices in the upbringing of children to make them aspire to higher cultural goals and to higher standards. And as I've mentioned all along, there's the spiritual aspect, and these would include customs and practices, recognizing that all of creation is a spiritual gift. Yeah. Next. So when all of these come together, as Maslow would say, you become self-actualizing. In Blackfoot, we would say you become a true Blackfoot. When a Blackfoot is brought up in a sea, free from stress, has feelings of security, belonging, personal worth, and is steeped in spirituality, that person is self-actualizing and healthy. When the members of the society, in this case Blackfoot society, are all self-actualizing, the whole society is healthy. Next. Now, my wife, Amethyst, in her graduate work, put, self-actualizing as follows. Given the opportunity, a culture attempts to mold its members into ideal personality types. The culture of the Plains Indians are no exception to this rule. For Blackfoot, the ideal personality is one that shows strength, both physically and spiritually. He or she is a person who is generous and shows kindness to all. And he or she is a person who puts the group needs ahead of individual wants and desires. He or she is a person that grows in wisdom. He or she is a person that is steeped in spiritual and ritual knowledge. That's part of that self-actualizing aspect. Next. So he or she is a person who, in view of all the expectations, and God knows we walk around with a lot of expectation, whether through internal dialogues or from people wanting us to do this, do that, and so on. So all these expectations, a Blackfoot that's self-actualizing goes about his or her life and approaches all my relations in a sea of friendship and easygoing manner, humor, and good feelings. He or she is a person who attempts to suppress inner feelings, anger, and disagreement with the group. He or she is a person who is expected to, display bravery, hardiness, and strength against enemies and outsiders. He or she is a person who is adaptable, remember the flux, adaptability, and takes the world as it comes without complaint. All these are part of that self-actualizing notion. Next. So when we put all of these together, social values, such as stated earlier, are those parts that we use for standards, aspirations, and goals. And we have many social values in Blackfoot culture, but let me just give 3 or 4 examples of that. So, next, wholeness, the whole idea about looking at the big picture as opposed to isolation in Western thought. If all of those parts come together, social order results. If the whole is maintained, beauty, harmony, and balance results. Kindness is a big part of it. And relation, harmony in interpersonal relations is joined to the capacity for caring. The resulting behavior is friendship, caring, amiability, mildness, and acquiescence, and so on. Yeah, and that's the reason why, to a very large extent, when Europeans came, we wanted to be kind to them and so on. And they said, hey, this is the way to do things. This is the way to do things. Well, that easygoingness and acquiescence and so on, saying, hey, yeah, well, let's try that, see. But we're finding out that all of that is really not working well for us. Next. So, honesty means that truthfulness and integrity is conditioned by respect. It results in tolerance and equanimity, respect for others, and a highly internalized conscience and sense of trustworthiness. See? Sharing is another value, means being generous, cooperative, and collective well-being as always the goal. Strength means strength of character, self-mastery, having fortitude, peace, harmony, and well-being, of oneself and others. Those are examples of those goals, those values, and they're set as standards or goals to aspire to. Yeah. Next. So, if a person was brought up in this setting, in this context, and so on, using those paradigms and so on, hey, you will begin to see that whole notion of self-actualization. Being Blackfoot, in other words, being brings about the whole notion of wellness, providing you follow those paradigms, those values, those customs. Next. Now, let's look at ourselves as psychologists. Okay. What is the Western interpretive template? Well, the Western interpretive template is about certainty, which in turn brings about a stagnant world. You know, my drinking buddy, Einstein's famous phrase, God does not play dice with the universe. In other words, everything is going to be the same forever and a day. That's why I refer to it as a stagnant world. You know, everything is about matter. See, it's not about spirit. It's not about energy forces. So in other words, the flux as opposed to a stagnant world. Matter as opposed to energy waves. See? And everything is inanimate in Western thought, except for you and me. See? We're the only ones that are, you know, sentient beings. See? We never think of a rock as having a spirit. We do in Blackfoot. We do. Those rocks have spirit. And they've been around for a long time. I can learn from those rocks. For instance, an example of that is, hey, the fish has been around, according to scientists, 450 million years. We human beings, as we know each other, we've only been around for 250,000 years. A big difference in age, say. So the thing then is, those rocks can teach us something. The fish has 450 million years of memory it can draw on. We human beings are only 250,000 years old, and we think we know everything, when in reality, we're brand new kids on the block. Next. So, continuing with the Western interpretive template, it's about reductionism. Reductionism is the rule and not relationships. In other words, one true God, one right way, one correct answer. Think about that in a classroom situation. And we think about it as been there, done, did it. Let's move on. It's not about renewal. In combination, this is what makes up the Western interpretive template. It's from those bases that Western thought processes, including psychology, comes from. Next. So, colonialism, for instance, is a social determinant of mental health. Social determinants of health were never given much recognition in the past. No, those don't play much. But colonialism has been given, has not been given that way. Even though most indigenous people refer to it as a source of ill health. Colonialism and social determinants of health, when considered by the medical establishment and governments, are usually very narrowly defined, and factors such as spirituality, land relationships, geography, language, all of those don't mean much in Western thought. So how did all of this come about? How did it all come about? Well, let's find out next. See, when we're talking about stress, see, in other words, what we're saying is that stress from colonialism has brought about a lot of the mental illnesses with regard to indigenous people. And studies have been done. For instance, the most recent I saw, but it's a few years old now, from Harvard University, and that is, hey, stress, is something that actually can affect the architecture of the brain. See, so think about that. Stress can actually affect the architecture of the brain. See, well, all of colonialism, from a holistic perspective, has that effect on our people. See, so, but in our practices as psychologists, do we take that seriously into consideration? Next. So, coming back to you as psychologists, does Western psychology really deeply understand in the indigenous interpretive templates? Does psychology really understand how a Blackfoot, for instance, processes the residential school experience? How it processes racism, notions of freedom, lack of security, and so on. See, because we, from a Western point of view, hey, with our Western interpretive template, we're really going into these factors. But I'm asking you, do we take those into consideration? See? So just like we said at the beginning, to be effective psychological practitioners, we have to understand the cultural background, those metaphysics that make up other cultures like Blackfoot, to be effective. Next. So I'll leave that question to you, and you might discuss it in your breakout sessions. Aboriginal peoples are making a comeback. In other words, we're beginning to say, well, we've tried the Western ways, but they're really not working well for us. But in the medical and mental health fields, should they also be doing some reflective thinking and asking themselves some profound questions about how they approach their practices? So that, for instance, if toxic stress is a major cause of poor mental health, how can we reduce that stress? Poor health may be caused by economic, social, political, and cultural factors such as inequality, discrimination, and insecurity. See? So in other words, how do we as psychologists process those? Do we process them from a Blackfoot or Mi'kmaq interpretive template? Well, we should bring and be aware of those. So I guess my message is, let's bring the other interpretive template into the picture, whether it's Cree, whether it's Anishinaabe, whether it's Mi'kmaq, so that together between Western and Indigenous interpretive templates will make for a better mental health practice. When I'm talking to scientists like quantum physicists, I tell them, hey, it's kind of like looking out through a window. Well, the window will only allow you to see a certain spectrum of that reality out there. See? But if you added the Blackfoot or Cree or Anishinaabe window to that, you'll be able to see a much broader spectrum of reality. And you will come up with stuff that might not otherwise be available to you if you're only looking out through one window. That's the importance of bringing these two interpretive templates together. And that's the message I would like to leave with you today. So thank you very much for allowing me to share these thoughts with you. It's a great honor for me. I wish I was there with you in person. But let's see what the combination of those different interpretive templates can bring about. It'll bring about creativity in the mental health field. Thank you.